Hello, and welcome to the eighth episode of What is Cosmic Intelligence? My name is John Barnwell, and I'm here with my greatest teacher and most illustrious student, Douglas Gabriel. And we're here to try and share with you some questions that we've pondered for our year going on 50 years, I believe. And so this ought to be an interesting exploration for us, merely an artistic treatment, because it's exceedingly difficult to do any kind of comprehensive overview of the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, being that his collected edition is 36 and a half feet of shelf space, and that includes over 6,700 lectures and over 50 published books and articles and so forth. And then there's all the whole field of students that surrounded him and their students. And so it's quite a body of work that can only be described as epic in proportion. But today we want to go deeper into it. And since this is the eighth episode, as is the case in apocalyptic numbering, that the eighth is a recapitulation. This has to do with the lemniscate. And in that lemniscate, you have the possibility of crossing a threshold, making a transition to the next octave. So, Dr. Douglas, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. I'm very happy to be associated with all of you anthroposophists, students of Rudolf Steiner. It's a never-ending field of research, that's for sure. And recently I have discovered, because of good questions from your subscribers, some interesting ideas about cosmic intelligence, or what I like to call the cosmic I am, and its relationship to the human I am. And I think that's what we're going to be addressing today.
Yes. For those of you that are interested in delving beyond what we're going to share with you today, I provided links to some relevant lectures by Rudolf Steiner, and I provided you with both the text link on the Rudolf Steiner archive that's been maintained by James Stewart for so many years before he passed the baton off, but he's still in the background. And then there's also links towards Dale Brunswald's reading out loud those lectures. So that's a real treat. And so you'll be able to kind of compare what we say to what's enfolded within those particular lectures that I singled out and Douglas singled out. And so, yes, well, why don't we begin? And let's begin at the beginning. I think that's probably the most relevant way to approach this. And that's the whole episode leading into the entry of the ego into relationship to the birth process itself. So we're going to be talking a lot about the balance that takes place between the mysteries of birth and death, because that's the two levels of the threshold that we encounter. And so in dealing with the threshold, by that we mean our point of entry into the spiritual world. And the custodian of that is our cosmic I am. It's our higher being. And Rudolf Steiner makes the point in that as we go through our life, we see events unfold in our life while we're young that we don't understand until much later in life. And we look back and we realize how significant what might be an insignificant event to us at the time was a real turning point for us as far as our personal encounters and karma and so forth. And he says that that's due to the orchestration that takes place in our destiny through the interaction with what he describes as our higher ego, or the true ego, which is that which is from the anointment of earth evolution by Christ with the cosmic ego, which is the macrocosmic ego, of which our personal ego, our true ego, is shares in that, like a drop shares within the ocean. And then we have our personal ego, the one that we think is the important one, the one that doesn't really know very much. That's the one we deal with day after day. And there's this intervention and weaving in our destiny between this higher ego, our guardian angel, and the whole unfoldment of our destiny. And it is through that agency that we see that Christ is always with us. And as he said, I shall be with you always, even unto the end of days. And so when you look at and you say, well, what is this representing? Christ also said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so let's begin there.
Yes, and you also gave in your notes, as well as to me, the indications that the Gospel of Mark, Steiner's interpretation of the Gospel of Mark, would be a good place to get some footing here. And so in that, I took one quote and put it in my notes for the program. And it says basically two things that I'd like to highlight. One of them is that in the past, we must remember that the human being's ego, or I am, was not very developed. As a matter of fact, you don't have to go back very far, even anything beyond 2000 BC, and you're talking about almost a group soul consciousness based upon tribal consciousness led by a priest king or a priestess. And basically the people did what the group did, and they didn't really have an individual ego. And that is pointed out here in the Gospel of Mark's interpretation by Steiner. And he says that at those times they were using their astral body. So before the ego came into the ability to have abstract thinking, the astral body, the body of desires, you have the physical, the etheric, the astral, the ego, in one way of looking at it. And the astral body was what was used to look into the spiritual world. Now that creates a very interesting dynamic, because in the past, natural clairvoyance allowed people, even when they were in their tribal consciousness, their collective group consciousness, they were able to still look into the spiritual world. And therefore, they weren't terrified by the idea of death. They weren't terrified by the things that an ego in today's modern world, an I am standing on its own, is terrified of the future, terrified of death, terrified of everything, because they don't seem to know much. They don't have a cosmology. And when you stand alone and you have no idea where you came from, why you're here, and where you're going, it is extremely disconcerting. So as we developed the ego, what we noticed recently in a podcast about the in this Akasha series that we're doing, we noticed that when you go all the way back, you have to say that the spirits of form created the higher self of the human being, and as Rudolf Steiner says, it never incarnates into the earth. Our lower self, our lower ego, our lower I am incarnates into the earth, but the higher self remains in the spiritual world. Now, when we're talking about the being of Adam, Steiner makes it very specific that he says that Adam had a sister soul that he called, of course, taking from the Hebrew teachings and Kabbalah, Adam Kadmon. In other words, a copy of Adam, which Steiner calls in many other places the other man inside of us, or the other person inside of us. And so there is a higher self, but that higher self does not come into the physical world. Why? Because your ego is immortal. It was immortal from the time that it was made as a copy, as a replica of Christ working through the realm of the spirits of form, the Elohim, also called the Exousiai. And so Christ has given us the template. And each human being has a soul and a spirit, but the spirit does not fully incarnate, and it is removed from time and space. Now, that time in terms of linear time, it is not removed from endurance, but it is outside of the realm of time, and it is outside of the realm of space. Now, it's not outside of the realm of spiritual space called emptiness, or the clear light that can arise out of the emptiness of space. Also, light, sound, and words, and what the Tibetans call rays. So, out of this emptiness of space and out of the endurance of time, your spirit exists in a realm that, according to Rudolf Steiner, he says, was somewhat near the throne of God when creation brought human beings into being. And the beings of form are, in essence, were the group soul of all human beings to begin with, just as the spirits of motion, or the dunamis, are the group souls of the animals. The spirits of curiosities, or wisdom, are the group soul of plants, and the spirits of thrones, or of willpower, are indeed the group soul of the minerals. And so we grow out of that realm of the group soul in the past, and were given deeds by Christ throughout all of past prehistory, ancient, very ancient history. Christ gave us deeds to help us basically stand upright, to speak, to think, to develop the ability for immortality through the mystery of Golgotha and Christ's death. And then through memory, Christ is really also the Lord of memory. He's also the Lord of karma, and he's also the group soul of human beings when they merge in the realm of life spirit in the future. Now, that realm will not be like the group soul that started the beginning and creation of the human form and the I am. It will be on a higher level, a higher octave, as John just pointed out, on the other side of the threshold indeed. And those are our higher three egos. And as those are developed, then we go back to the condition that we were created in. And that is not just a human being, it is a human being also in terms of what the human being becomes in the future. So we have an angelic nature that has always been reserved in the heavens. Some say under the throne or behind the throne of the Father God or the Creator God, and that it is there waiting to endow us, to embody us with the capacities that it was born with. But we don't have those capacities now because we're stuck in time and space, and we're trying to work out what it takes to gradually go back and to inherit what it is that was our gift from the beginning. So it's a mystery that goes beyond time and space. And when you start to talk about the ego, you realize that the ego uses many vessels, many tools, all the different constituent parts of the human being's constitution, physical, soul, and spirit, and that even the ego of other beings, as Steiner points out, can come into the human being and actually share a host vehicle of a human body with other beings. And he points out that John the Baptist was one such being who shared his body with an angel. So, as we've been saying before, when you reach up into the realm of imagination, into moral imagination, where living thoughts exist and angels live in that realm, then we are in fact taking on that nature that's still in the spiritual world that we have, that is our angelic nature. And so the question of I am, the question of cosmic consciousness can't really be answered without having a complete biography of the cosmic Christ and his deeds and all the beings that work with Christ, and to have a complete biography of the human I am, which, as far as I know, Rudolf Steiner gives the most comprehensive picture of that, and we could discuss it from now until the cows come home. That's for sure.
Yes, I think that's the challenge, because you'd have to say that basically that 36 and a half feet of shelf space is essentially the biography of the cosmic I am. And so it can't be seen as separate from any of the paths in which Rudolf Steiner blazed a trail, in which he just, unlike any other, was able to create initiatives in all various aspects of human culture and science, art, and so forth. So that's why it's so challenging. But in coming to terms with what Douglas had said in the lecture cycle of December 12th, 1910, and that's in the Collected Works, volume 124, it's the lectures entitled, in the recent printed edition, Kyrios, the Lord of the Soul. And this is Kyrios, that's the key word that Rudolf Steiner makes a point of describing it as being a referent to this whole idea of this cosmic being of the higher ego. And he talks about the different gospels as being different vantage points relative to understanding the mystery of Christ. And so you have the Gospel of John represented by the eagle, and you have what's called the tetramorph. And the tetramorph is that representation you will see it in cathedrals or on mosaic works of art, and you see surrounding Christ, like with the picture I put on the cover of this particular show, that we have the four gospels represented by their zodiacal symbols, and that's a very real and dynamic aspect of the unfoldment of the Christian mystery. And he talks about how the eagle represents the Gospel of John, and that relates to the sign of Scorpio. The bull represents the Gospel of Luke, and that represents Taurus. The Matthew Gospel is represented by the man or the angel, and that represents Aquarius, of which, by the way, we're just entering into this zodiacal sign of Aquarius today, so that's auspicious. And the age of Aquarius, though I must clarify, the age of Aquarius begins at 3574 AD, according to the astronomical classical consideration, leading all the way back to the foundation of the present zodiacal system in Babylon, where they use the center of Scorpio and Taurus as being the demarcation point, and that the signs extended 15 degrees to either side. So that's the system we're working with here. Although anytime you enter into a relationship with that particular zodiacal region, you can get intimations of things that are of the future to come in the age of Aquarius. And that's the age of the water bearer, where he's pouring out the anointment of the water that comes from the manifestation of the sixth principle in man. And that sixth principle will lead men to an understanding that the other is more significant than thyself. That if you're entering into a relationship with this understanding from the higher ego, you see that what it does is it's like your moderator of your personal karma and the way in which you receive others, so that as one's sensitivity to this grows, one's compassion grows, and that this becomes an unfolding process, so that we come to a realization of the fifth principle in the fifth post-Atlantean period, leading to the sixth principle of the life spirit in that future Aquarian age. So I just wanted to clear the air on that. Oh, and by the way, on my podcast the other day with Reverend David, I said that the cathedrals that are dedicated to Notre Dame, to the Blessed Virgin, were the constellation of the Great Bear. I made a mistake there. It's the constellation of the Virgin. The constellation of the Great Bear is from the monasteries of the Dominicans. So I just wanted to clear the air on that. Although I did notice that nobody's seen the notice except for maybe. But that being said, so getting back to the Gospels, it's interesting because he makes the point, and he refers to the writers of the Gospels as inspired occultists. And so you have this powerful imagination that he's providing you there, that there's a deep mystery in these Gospels, and that really the Bible, the New Testament, is a book for the future, because we don't even have the faculties to be able to unlock its depths. And that's why many of the deepest individuals of modern times leading back have spent their time concerning themselves with the Bible. And in getting close to that, if you go to the Gospel of St. Mark, you see that leading up to it, the Gospel of St. John gives you that high vantage point in the beginning of the first 14 verses, where he describes the incarnation of the Word and the culmination in the mystery of Golgotha. So it's a very exalted eagle viewpoint. It's from high up in the air. And then in the Gospel of Luke, you have that very nurturing story of the shepherds, and you have the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha with the angels singing Alleluia. And it becomes profound from that vantage point, because that deals with the idea of this whole incarnation of the Nathan being, the Adam Kadmon. And also reference Rudolf Steiner makes of only in one place that I know of, he says that it was the etheric body of the Nathan soul when it was released, because you go through this process of the donated etheric body, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the donated etheric body, the maternal etheric body, becomes replaced by your own personal etheric body. But he said that the Buddha in the spiritual world was able to receive that donated etheric body of the Nathan soul, and that was the rejuvenation of the stream of Buddha. So I mean, that's like, that is something that's so deep, but we'll need a whole episode just to talk about what that might mean. But when you then you go into the Matthew Gospel, and it gives you the whole idea of the lineage of the Solomon, the bloodline that's given in the Gospel of Matthew, and all the generations, and how it comes to a fulfillment in the Magi that have that mystery stream that leads back to Zarathustra during the time of Cyrus the Great and his mystery school, in which Pythagoras was present. But when you get into the Gospel of Luke, actually, from a certain vantage point, Rudolf Steiner refers to the Gospel of Matthew as being the deepest of the Gospels in a certain regard, because it deals so strongly with the cosmic mystery, which is very interesting, because it was St. Mark that was sent by St. Peter to go to Egypt, and he established a school in Alexandria with Ormus, which the stream of the lodges of the builders leads back to that particular school founded by that Serapian priest under the guidance of Mark. And then you also have the beginning of the Coptic Church in Egypt. So this is really a critical understanding. But then you have the Venetians stealing the relics of Mark and taking them to Venice. And so in the Cathedral of Mark, you have the relics of St. Mark in the city of Venice, the city of the traders. Although in Egypt, the Coptics say that they still have the skull. So there's this whole interesting thing having to do with uh, the astronomical side of things. And even in this event of the stealing of the relics, because it was through the astronomical understandings of the city of Venice, and they were all centered in sailing ships, and they were transporting troops to the Crusades, and they were traveling all over the place. And how could they do that? Because they had the star maps of Piri Reis, and so there's this whole cosmic thing. So you see this mundane development of the mystery of the astronomical understanding, but beneath this is a very, very deep mystery leading back to the events of Christ. And Rudolf Steiner points out to take notice of the times of day at which certain things happen, that the cosmic Christ is literally expressing the cosmic forces, the macrocosmic forces. And so it's at the end of the day, for example, where he would go into his healing ministry. And Rudolf Steiner gets into explaining in detail how this ties into the cosmic expression of the zodiac. So that there's so much there, but that's represented by the lion. That's the symbol of the Gospel of Mark. And the lion has to do with the heart. And so we wouldn't be treating this subject properly if we didn't come to some kind of approach toward an understanding of the mysteries of the heart.
Which, of course, is the lion in the heart. And when you look at the Sphinx, what is that? That is really a cosmic representation of the cosmic I am. The angel, the lion, the eagle, and the bull are the higher forms of thinking, feeling, and willing. And so the animals represent those three soul forces, but the angel represents who we become. But I like to look at that in terms of saying that Christ represents those four through the gospel, and that Christ is not only the four cardinal points, but all in the gospels. But of course, as we all know, there are many other gospels. Not to ignore Rudolf Steiner's fifth gospel. And then, of course, there's the fact that these different four views, presented the view from the Jews, from the Gnostics, from basically the most spiritual view that one can get directly from Christ. And you have four different stories about Jesus of Nazareth. And what are those stories? Those are simply showing the different manifestations of the cosmic I am, the ego. And Rudolf Steiner said that the balanced ego is one that can take all 12 worldviews or the 12 zodiacal influences and merge them into a synthetic view of the 13th view, which is in the middle. And of course, we have Christ as the 13th inside of his 12 apostles. And this is an example for us. So the ancient Egyptian, because what we mentioned before, they really didn't have a developed ego back in the very most ancient times of Egypt. They were dependent upon their astral body and the images, and that's why they had hieroglyphic pictures, pictograms, hieroglyphic pictures of everything, because they could read into the astral light. And when they would go to sleep at night, or when they would be initiated, or for those who were great priest kings, they could meditate and do spiritual work and go across the threshold. But when they went across the threshold at night, what did they see? They saw the Sphinx. But the Sphinx didn't scare them. It was the guardian of the threshold, the lesser guardian, but it didn't scare them. It was at a distance because they didn't have much of an ego development, so they didn't have much karma. So the Sphinx would represent the riddle of mankind. What is a human being? And so with the Oedipus myth, and which is actually broadly told in many different ways, the Sphinx represents, of course, riddling what the human being is. What is the human being? And so the one riddle is what walks on 4 in the morning, on 2 in the afternoon and walks on 3 in the evening. And of course, that's a human being as a baby, an adult, and as an old person walking with a cane. But that's to indicate that we are a being that must be seen over time. We are not a being that is just one element of a lion with the heart, or the eagle thinking, or the bull the will. No, we're all three, and they must all three be balanced, but even balanced in a greater way, because the cardinal symbols usually represent three zodiacal signs, as they are trying to depict what it is that's in the zodiac. And remember, the zodiac is the zoo circle. It's the circle of animals. And in our head, we have all of those animals active, rushing forward. And when we do not contain one or the other, then our physical face starts to resemble an animal. And this is what we're trying to avoid. And if we have the um, amalgamation of all animals, what do we have? We have the dragon. And thus, when we cross the threshold now, oftentimes people will see Michael, who is doing what? Taming the dragon with a fiery sword in one hand and a scale in the other's hand, saying, you need to bring a balanced thinking, feeling, and willing filled with morality to the threshold, or I can't let you across, and the flaming sword will keep you from crossing awake and consciously into the spiritual world. We can't let you defile it with your filth of the physical world. And I know that may sound crude, but it's the truth. We are actually, we are the cast off dirt of the spiritual world. We are the shadow, as it were. And so as we cross the threshold, not like the Egyptians, wondering what we are, but we now have an ego, and we have developed a lot of karma, good and bad. And so the ancient Egyptians, for those who did have an ego, when they died, they would have to meet the god Anubis, the jackal-headed god Anubis, who would weigh their soul on a scale against an ostrich feather. If it wasn't light, if the soul, the heart wasn't light, it couldn't enter the afterlife. Well, what happens now? If, say, you're a good old Catholic, like I used to be, well, we're going to see Michael at the threshold every night as we pray and ask for help, because Michael is the countenance of Christ. But when we die, we used to say we'd go to the pearly gates and we'd see St. Peter as the greater guardian of the threshold, who would basically judge us and open up the gates or not open up the gates. But now, Steiner teaches us that those jobs have been taken over by Christ. Christ is the greater guardian. Christ is the Lord of karma. Christ is the judge of mankind and of the whole earth, and that Christ is triumphant in all of this. So if we keep in mind what it is that we have already become, and realize that we're just simply putting on new clothes each time that we take a spiritual advancement, and we surrender to the Spirit consciously, and out of conscious decisions, out of free decisions, we then accept the grace of the love of the spiritual world, then we can become an angel, an archangel, an archai being, just like in the very beginning, when the thrones were creating what later became the stones that we walk upon. The archai of that time were human, and they were coming into what we would call our willpower. So the archai can be found in our will, the archangels can be found in our feeling, and the angels can be found in our thinking, even at this moment, for little tiny nanoseconds, when they come in and they fill the Holy Grail in our heart. We can become these beings, and we then defy space and time. So when we talk about the ego, when we talk about the I am, and we talk about the human I am becoming the cosmic I am, all of these things can be taken into consideration. Or you can just do what some of the great Eastern teachers taught: simply be pure. And if your heart is pure, as Christ has taught us, and we are like children, then we can enter back into the heaven that we came from and take on the white toga, the white clothing that you wear in the apocalypse when you are one who sings the new gospel, the eternal gospel, preach the eternal gospel, and basically are saved in the apocalypse, which is in fact a triumphant story. It is Christ triumphant. And we need to realize that the apocalypse is describing what all of us go through when we meet the guardian of the threshold, the lesser guardian and the greater guardian, and we face our own double, our ego that has misused thinking, feeling, and willing, and created three specters that are basically like animal parts of ourself called doubles. And those doubles are also part of your ego. They are some of the tools, the instruments that are used. But we often forget because we're told such scary stories about the guardian of the threshold in Bulwer Lytton's book Zanoni, or by Blavatsky describing the dweller on the threshold, or Franz Hartmann, whoever it is that you want to get the description. It's rather terrifying. And it should be terrifying because all of our misdeeds, all of our karmic indebtedness simply hold us back from ascending. It helps us descend and turn back into animals instead of angels. So if we realize that the ego isn't really found in any one specific place in the body, it can rotate around. It can use any of our vehicles, physical, etheric, astral, sentient soul, intellectual soul, conscious soul, any of our three spiritual selves. But Rudolf Steiner tells us, exactly as John Barnwell just told us, the real secret is in the heart. Steiner says there's a box in the heart where your karma is stored, an inviolable box that cannot be destroyed. And it's in the shape right now of a cube, and that it defines our ego space as being inside of what we would know as being forward, backward, up, down, left, and right. We're in the center, and that's in the heart. And that has already been planned out and is completely spelled out in the evolution of the spiritual evolution of humanity, because Christ had pointed out that in his Father's heaven there's mansion and there are many rooms. He's gone ahead to prepare them for him. He said that he went ahead of the caravan to prepare our way. He is basically going ahead of us. First off, he created everything that gave us the ability to have an ego that could have abstract thinking and free thinking, that could make decisions out of pure love through wisdom. So we have that as a gift. But what's the future hold? The future is simply to accept the gifts that are already being presented by the grace of Christ. In other words, accept the oil, the christening oil, and allow yourself to be christened so that your Christ himself can come forward. And then you start to see that the human ego can be transformed in this incarnation and in all future incarnations, and will. And if you have Steiner's cosmology before you, because as Barnwell just pointed out, Dr. Barnwell, that we in fact have this gift of Rudolf Steiner's. And if we take that gift, who gives us an example of a perfected vehicle, and that's what John was just saying, in the Principle of Spiritual Economy, again, only as far as I know, spelled out in great detail by Rudolf Steiner, though referenced by others in esoteric science. The Principle of Spiritual Economy says that as Christ lived and died and resurrected, he perfected all of the vehicles that the human being has. And they are now in the etheric realm that he calls Shambhala, the etheric realm that circles the earth. And saints and great beings can borrow these perfected vehicles of Christ and let them indwell in them, just as John the Baptist allowed an angel to indwell in him. We can allow, some can allow, maybe not all of us, these perfected vehicles also of the saints, but certainly of Christ. And so one might say that Rudolf Steiner's, 354 books, 6,700 lectures, we can say that he was the example of what a human I am on the path from consciousness to conscience. Because when you have a full conscience, you know your karma as it's happening and you become an angel. You start to work in the realm even higher than an angel. So from consciousness to conscience, which are all gifts of the Christ, Rudolf Steiner has spelled out the entire thing. And he is an example, probably, some would say, of one of the perfected vehicles of Christ that helped him to understand these things. Because when you look at it, he's the only person who pointed out the content of the fifth gospel, the pre-earthly deeds of Christ, the working of the Kyrioteites and Sophia with the Christ, all of these things that we talk about, which really are an advanced picture of the future, in many cases are only described by Rudolf Steiner. So I am personally incredibly indebted, but I'm also a utilitarian pragmatist. So I have been searching my life since I met Steiner's work at age 19 to see if he's made any mistakes, because I have such a big ego that I think that I'm checking to see if Steiner was right. Well, so far as I can tell, except for a couple tiny little things that he said, which he corrected most of those later, I would say that he's probably the most accurate philosopher, a spiritual scientist, um, uh, basically teacher of religion, a teacher of psychology, teacher of archaeology, of architecture, of science, art, and religion, whatever it is. You have a question, go to Rudolf Steiner, and you'll probably be able to find the answer. And the answer to the biggest question of all is, what is the I am, and how is it that we develop it? So, John, what can you tell us about the principle of spiritual economy in relationship to the cosmic thinking and cosmic I am?
Well, first I want to put in a qualifier, because when you start approaching religious concepts, people will get the misunderstanding this is something exclusive to one particular group of people, or one particular system of belief. And the mission of Christ, like Christ said, I have other flocks. So keeping that in mind, it brings up a statement that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe made in a letter to Sopwith Boisret back in March 22nd of 1831. And Goethe says, I have found no confession of faith to which I could ally myself without reservation. Now, in my old age, however, I have learned of a sect, the Hypsisterians, who, hemmed in between heathens, Jews, and Christians, declared that they would treasure, admire, and honor the best, the most perfect that might come to their knowledge, and inasmuch as it must have a close connection to the Godhead, pay it reverence. A joyous light thus beamed at me suddenly out of a dark age, for I had the feeling that all my life I'd been aspiring to qualify as a Hypsisterian. That, however, is no small task, for how does one, in the limitations of one's individuality, come to know what is most excellent? End quote. And so it's for anybody of any faith, religion, philosophical viewpoint, artistic persuasion, what have you. You have to open up your vision to this panoramic view of something that's universally human, leading down a path to what was characterized by Elizabeth Vrede, who's, by the way, a extremely significant individual relative to what we're discussing today, because of, let's see, I have them here somewhere, because of the work that she did as the first head of the mathematical astronomical section of the School of Spiritual Sciences, the Gratianum. But there's two books in particular, Anthroposophy and Astrology, the Astronomical Letters of Elizabeth Vrede, and then there's also Esoteric Studies from Mathematics to Star Lore. And there's also a work on study on the Bodhisattvas that was also published. And this is an individual that not many people are familiar with. And it's interesting because other than Marie Steiner, she attended personally more lectures than anyone. And which is, what a lucky person she was, yes? And she was Dutch, and she was brilliant, but she was kind of quiet, self-effacing, but had a unstoppable will to accomplish things. And I think that in Rudolf Steiner selecting her is very much telling. And she was the one who started the archive at the Goetheanum. But there were some untoward events that happened later on when there was a separation between individuals after the death of Rudolf Steiner, which I really don't want to get into today. But what I do want to point out is that Elizabeth Rita once made the remark in the face of all that drama that took place. She said, what we need is a cognitive organ of universal human love. And so the component that she was entirely focused on is that whole idea of love. And when you get into understanding the principle of spiritual economy that Douglas is making reference to, you look at some of the individuals that Rudolf Steiner refers to as being recipients of spiritual economy, like, for example, St. Francis of Assisi, who was, according to Rudolf Steiner, a recipient of the christened astral body of the Christ, that it was this perfected astral body. And so you see that St. Francis is legendary in his ability to heal and his ability, he's always seen with birds sitting on his shoulder, and that he could, one time there was trouble with a wolf that came into a village, and they asked St. Francis to help, and he went and walked up to the wolf and had a heart-to-heart with the wolf, and the wolf took off, So there's interesting legendary accounts of which Rudolf Steiner says are true, by the way. And so you have this potency in St. Francis, that he's manifesting that universal human love that Elizabeth Rita makes reference to. And then you have great figures like Thomas Aquinas, for example. And then you have like St. Augustine receiving the etheric body. So he had a tremendous capacity of intellect, but yet his astral body was kind of rough and tumble. I mean, it was said he was so big that he had difficulty getting through some doors, So you have the idea that there could be an unevenness of expression, whether or not a person has the transformed etheric body or astral body, and there could be a overlighting presence, and you can have that for a very short period of time that could be transformative for your whole life, just because of coming into proximity of one of these vehicles, not necessarily incarnating it and utilizing it as your personal vehicle. And so and that can happen for a short period of time or for a longer period of, so there's the complexity of it is compounded by the fact that Rudolf Steiner says that with the incarnation of Christ, he perfected every stage of human evolution from now into the future, and that these perfected vehicles are preserved in the spiritual world that Douglas referred to as Shambhala. It's that city of the New Jerusalem. And so you have access and replicas of these vehicles that the divine spiritual powers can utilize in the way that we've been referring to be sources of inspiration and growth and development. And so you have, this is so profound. I mean, I'm humbled in thinking of it. That just this morning I was sitting on the porch. It's freezing cold out, but there's wisps of snow all over the sidewalk and the ground and all that. And so I sat there, and I just said spontaneously, "Christ is Lord," and a wind came and did a single spiral and made the snow. I took a picture of it, but it doesn't come out really good. But a single whiff of wind came and picked up and created like a little vortex of snow, and then it just sprinkled to the ground. And I thought, well, that's an affirmation for you. And so this is a living relationship, I guess, what I wanted to say. And so when you get into understanding the cosmic schemes that are presented in the Gospel of Mark, that it's intensely profound. Because if you remember, I have made reference to this before, but when Jesus confounded the elders at the temple, the scribes and the Pharisees, they say he spoke with authority. That's how they translate it in the Bible. And Rudolf Steiner says that because of the loss of the understanding of mystery language, this goes way over the heads of the translators. When they say he spoke with authority, he spoke as kuriotetes. He spoke as spirits of wisdom. And Rudolf Steiner says that the scribes and the Pharisees were capable of coming under the inspiration of angels, archangels, or even archai at times, in some great examples. But to have the young Jesus come into the temple and be able to express himself as a kuriotetes, these are the beings our relationship with them. If you want to have a relationship with these beings of the second triad of hierarchies of the spirits of form, the dunamis and the kuriotetes, Rudolf Steiner says to look to the forces of nature, and that we could see expressions of that within the great works of art, with the paintings of sunsets and all of that, and that we should look to the inspiration of that particular piece of art rather than the art itself. And so you have this second triad of hierarchies bringing the beautiful sunsets and bringing the lightning striking in the air, and it's just a tremendously macrocosmic expression of the way we're nurtured within the arms of the hierarchy, so that it's hard to talk about because it's so humbling. It just you start to, on the one hand, feel as if you're expanding into this great macrocosm, but at that you realize that you're just washing the feet of the hierarchy, bowing in reverence to the eternal efforts of the divine spiritual powers on your behalf and how unworthy you are. And so that's what I was struck with this morning and considering our show today.
Well, that's so true. And I have the same sentiment. I feel the same way. As I was making this list, which I haven't seen anybody else make the list of the deeds of Christ, especially with Rudolf Steiner's statement of who Christ is now becoming and what Christ is doing now actively. He says the second most important event of all of human spiritual evolution is what is happening right now with Christ's appearance in the etheric. Of course, the most important was the mystery of Golgotha. And I passed over that pretty quickly when I mentioned it, but the mystery of Golgotha was basically the template of the cosmic I am telling human I ams, you are immortal. Embody your own Adam Kadmon. And in a way, then that leads to the following question. Where does grace end and free will begin? And if all I really have to do is empty myself, surrender myself to the spirit, to the hierarchy, and they will fill me with my own Adam Kadmon, my own ascension body, then where is free will? Where is the distinction between what is Christ and what is myself? What is the cosmic I am? What is the human I am? So Rudolf Steiner gives Waldorf teachers the following prayer. He says, Dear God, enable me to extinguish my personal ambitions completely, and may Christ make true in me the Pauline word, not I, but the Christ in me, that the Holy Spirit may hold sway in the teacher. This is the true Trinity. So as you do that every single day before you go out to teach in a Waldorf school, you're basically saying, please remove my I am and replace it with Christ's I am, the cosmic I am. And that really is simply a matter of surrendering. It really isn't even an action. It's it's kind of an anti-action. It's surrendering. But you know how hard it is to surrender when you have a giant ego like mine? My ego is as big as the whole world. It's as big as the cosmos, and I constantly am preaching all this stuff. For instance, the other day I was preaching that the universe is finite. Now, scientists will say that's insane, but it's now basically been demonstrated again and again that even our own solar system is finite and has a limit that we can't get beyond. We can't really conceive of what's out there in the cosmos. So when we talk about the cosmic I am, we just need to remember that every speck of everything in the whole cosmos is inside of each human being, in your heart, in your organs are the seven planets, the heart being, of course, the sun. Uh, every part of the cosmos is in you. So really, we are the temple. We are the Hierophant. We are the high priest or priestess. And all we really have to do is surrender ourselves to wed, to marry our spirit, the mysterium conjunction, it's called by many. It's basically the alchemical wedding. It's when the king and the queen can marry. It's when the virgin soul, which is often called Sophia, weds the spirit or the Lamb of God. Then, as John just pointed out, the city four square descends from heaven, and there we have paradise before us, and we then take on the capacities of re-entering Eden and imbibing of the tree of life and having the gifts of the tree of life, because we really made a foul up with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And basically, as I used to say all the time, and I think John probably got sick of me hearing it because I couldn't prove it. And then finally, I met my beautiful wife, and between the two of us, we were able to confirm that it is true that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the cross that Christ died upon. That the Adam Kadmon of the original Adam, John the Baptist, was the original Adam. Well, the Adam Kadmon became the Jesus that Christ incarnated into. So you have the first Adam there. John the Baptist has had his head cut off, and he becomes the group soul of the apostles, more or less. He's there witnessing through their group soul the death of the second Adam, or the first Adam. So the first and the second Adam were under the cross. And I can go into great detail, but I won't today. The first and the second Eve were under the cross. The great initiates who, for instance, Lazarus, who was raised by Christ, was under the cross, and he was Hiram Abiff reincarnated. Or so you have the greatest beings of spiritual history who had to take their place in relationship to the cross, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so that if they could actually understand it and understand that the cosmic Christ had incarnated and now had turned the earth from a planet into a star by Christ's blood entering into the earth, then their own ego. Now, remember what we said, the ego wasn't very developed by most people at that time. But if you had an ego and it was strong and you could withstand what it was that was being shown by the mystery of Golgotha, by the birth, death, descent into hell and resurrection and ascension of Christ, the mystery of Golgotha, if you could understand that, you became immortal at that moment. Or anyone at any time thereafter who can cognize that, who can consciously understand this concept of love that John has brought up, that Elizabeth Frida had basically also taught and found to be so significant. If you understand who Christ is and what that love is, you become immortal at that moment. Even now, let's say you never, as John pointed out also, Christ has many other flocks. Rudolf Steiner points out that you don't have to use Christian terms. It's all the same. Your higher self in any religion is still your higher self. And when you meet the being of the greater guardian, you might not call them Christ. You might call him Krishna. You might call him Sophia. You might call him whatever your beliefs are. So we're not promulgating standard religious beliefs in churches. We are promulgating the ideas of Rudolf Steiner that create a cosmic Christ, a cosmology of the cosmic Christ that is the most comprehensive thing that you can possibly come across in understanding Christ or Christ in yourself. So these are the great mysteries. We'll never be able to exhaust them because they keep changing, they keep evolving. And that quote that you gave of Goethe is absolutely so beautiful. When you read that to me not too long ago over the phone, I thought, wow, that's exactly how I have always felt. I'm like a universal Sufi. I like believe in all valid traditional religions because I believe they all have a golden thread. And that golden thread is the developing I am, becoming the cosmic I am. And you can put it in whatever religious terms you want, philosophical, you can do it epistemologically, you can do it any way you want. But in the end, the refined human capacities that Rudolf Steiner points out can attain knowledge of higher worlds will enter into those worlds and be able to communicate with those worlds when we basically replace our lower I am and our lower self with the higher Christ and self that is just waiting for us to accept the grace of God to be aligned with our own free will.
Yes, absolutely, and it's important to bring up relative to your beginning of your remarks is that it's that free will that's the component. See, because if we had the possibility of error, there would be no free will. So you could see what is going on, and we're all bumpkins like Parsifal when he begins his journey to become the Grail King, and that he doesn't know anything. He's just out there, and he just knows he wants to be good. And I want to share with you a short passage. And here it says, it's Rudolf Steiner in the 11th lecture of the mission of the individual folk souls in relation to Teutonic mythology. Rudolf Steiner says, those who are open to the impulse of spiritual science will, from the middle of the 20th century on, gradually experience a renewal of that which St. Paul saw in etheric clairvoyance as a mystery to come, the mystery of the living Christ. There will be a new manifestation of Christ, a manifestation which must come when human capacities develop naturally to the point when the Christ can be seen in the world in which he has always been present since the mystery of Golgotha, and in which he can also be experienced by the initiate. Mankind is gradually growing into that world in order to be able to perceive from the physical plane that which formerly could be perceived only in the mystery schools from the perspective of the higher planes. So in essence, what he's saying that in the ancient mystery schools, through the capacities of temple sleep, through the vehicle of the astral body, they were able to come into relationship to these divine spiritual beings. But because of the evolved state of human evolution, that we are moving into that time in which, with our free ego, our individual I am, we will be able to be conscious. We don't have to go into a trance, but we will be conscious, and we will have an experience of the Christ as we move into the future. And there's numerous, untold number of cases of people having that experience that has been heard about in many different instances. But with Rudolf Steiner, it was around 1899, which is very interesting in his personal biography, because although he was raised Catholic, and he was an altar boy, but that's just something he did. That was kind of a social interaction event. He said he'd never met anybody that was particularly superstitious, and his family His parents were free thinkers. His father worked for the railroad, and they had tendency towards science. And so he was really quite unaware of what was in the Bible. And around 1899, he had personal experience relating to the being of Christ manifesting to him as it did to Paul, and his Akashic clairvoyance that had been developing from childhood. Eventually, he was able to perceive the events of the Bible, and from that vantage point, and not having it influenced by him reading the Bible because he hadn't read it. It's an important point to consider, that he was not familiar with Scripture, and then when he went back and he looked, and he found that the Scripture did represent. He goes on through many different lecture cycles regarding the Gospels and the writings of Paul and all of this, and he makes the point of that the Scripture has levels and levels and levels, and that everything in it is true. It's just in what way can you decipher what is being presented to you, because the Scripture contains cadences relative to every stage of human destiny and evolution.
Yes, and that the stages of destiny and evolution have so much to do with free will. And as you said, that's the key factor. It's really the linchpin. So, free will, think of what the gods had to do to create the plants, the animals, the minerals, create this whole world for us, and still hide themselves from us. Now, why would they do that? So that we can be so egotistic that we can stand up with our free will, with our thinking, abstract thinking, and say, God doesn't exist. I'm basically the only person that counts in the whole universe, and I really don't even care about other people. And certainly there's no God, because I can't see a God. I can't smell or taste or touch a God. So we came to free will in this alone condition. And unfortunately, as we rose up through the sentient soul, intellectual soul, conscious soul, when we're in the conscious soul, unfortunately, what I'm about to tell you is a very sad state, but it's the state that we're in now. We need to accept it, learn from it, and go on. So Rudolf Steiner characterized the consciousness soul. First, he says that if you can glean what seems to be the eternal, or the evidence of the virtues, heavenly virtues in the physical world, and you can take them across the threshold and no longer use brain-bound thinking or sense perception, and use supersensible organs of perception, like the human heart, a moral organ of love. If you can use those, then you can enter into the spiritual world. And at that point, then you would realize that you're not alone, that all humans are connected, that we're all created from a similar template of a cosmic I am, that the whole spiritual world exists, and you would then not have any freedom. But you can do that. And as you become an angel, you no longer have freedom, folks. All angels agree with each other except the fallen angels. And if you meet an angel, then you're going to meet multiple angels, because they're all connected. So your guardian angel connects you to all angels. They connect you to archangels and archai, right on up through the hierarchy. But you would have no free will if God manifested in a way that you could make it a logical deduction. So the real question is, as this song says, have you ever looked the devil in the face? Have you ever looked the devil in the face, my friend? Because if you haven't, you might be going the same way. So if you don't know God exists because you never ran across God, and you don't know the devil exists because you never looked him in the face, then you may think that you are God, or that you can annihilate God nihilistically. That's true. Free will allows you to attempt to annihilate your immortal self. very hard to do, by the way. You can become an animal again. You can go backwards and become more animalistic human than human. But the question is, can you use your free will to discover that you are a co-creator with God and that God is inside of you? And if you can discover that, then you are no longer completely free. You're not necessarily duty bound, but as Fichte said, all of life is really about accomplishing duty. It's about the willpower engaging in moral activity. And that's all true. But if you become aware of your own guardian angel, if you become aware of Christ as the greater guardian, Michael as the lesser guardian, of Sophia as the midwife of your soul, and you're having all of these experiences, don't be scared by the fact that you will be used by the divine, because we are the eyes, the ears, the hands, the heart of the divine in this physical world. So the more that you realize that you are a spiritual being and you take control of your own initiation and you commune with the spiritual world, don't be surprised that your freedom in love becomes rather limited, because the only way to be free in love is to love everyone. To absolutely love everyone exactly for who they are now, not who they could be or potential. And when you have that, then you start to realize that you are becoming a cosmic I am. And it seems as if your dreams become now a place where the spiritual world wishes to teach you, that your day becomes a place where the dreams of the spiritual world start to manifest, so that you can start to understand karmic consequences, how you can help others, and specifically how you can help others who are not similar to yourself, how you can love your enemy, because that's the ultimate task. So free will, when it can truly embody out of freedom, loving your own enemy, that's one of the highest things you could do. And then you literally start to hear that bell that rings when the angel gets their wings, because that's what we're going to become in the future, is a being who literally not just has the whispering of Christ in your ear as your conscience telling you what is wrong if you've done something wrong, or what is right, or what the karmic consequences will be. But Rudolf Steiner says that in the next great round of existence of the earth, we will literally be walking side by side with Christ. Christ can appear even now through this principle of spiritual economy in multiple places, actually infinite multiple places at once. And in the future, moral beings will literally be able to turn to their Christ and higher self, which is speaking to Christ, and have a conversation about what to do with the profound love that you will be surrounded by in that incarnation. And how does that love get shared with others in the best and most effective way? So Christ is going to become our companion, standing right next to us in the future. So those of us who already hear the voice of Christ, that's not a hallucination. And as we know, many people who overdosed on drugs or had psychological breaks, who went across the threshold into the spiritual world, they come back and what do they say? In many cases, I am God. I am Jesus Christ. Well, they are. And it's just that they don't know how to appropriately express it in time and space. And they think they see that golden moment of illumination, really a moment of enlightenment, to know that they are God, that they are Christ. But if they become personally identified with that, with their lower self, it's a psychotic illness, of course. So all of these things are there before us. We must follow the path of the Grail, which is the gradual path from the bumpkin to the person who is the king of the Grail, who has moral conscience. And that's our path. And as we do that, one of the best things we can do is sit and have conversations like this, so that later, as you're reflecting in your meditation upon these things, the gifts of the Spirit can come flowing in to that Grail of your heart, and you can then start to commune with the angelic thoughts that can be found in moral imagination in your heart.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of give a powerful imagination, here's the poet Novalis one of those advanced souls, Friedrich von Hardenberg, who was contemporary with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And Novalis says, the root of all eternal interconnectedness is an absolute omnidirectional tendency. In this dwells the power of the hierarchy, the true Freemasonry, and the invisible bond of true thinkers. Herein resides the potential for a universal republic. And so, like he usually does, he kind of like outdoes everybody and gives the most exalted cosmic vantage point. And so it's that whole idea of interconnectedness and the relationship to the other. And it's coming into relationship with this second self that you have, this higher ego that will give you the spiritual content that you can make your own as you move into the future and evolve into, to become a grail, to be able to receive the input of the divine spiritual beings. And then you see that there's this resolve that comes with it that has a great many benefits. And when Christ was doing his healings, he said, these and greater things shall ye do, and so it's like, it's really dynamic what's in store for those that are capable of walking this thorny path. But in coming to understand it, really what it is when Rudolf Steiner gets into talking in his lecture regarding the understanding of the human heart is a real key, because in that it's kind of too much to be able to do justice to in this short episode. But there's a lecture that he gave in May 26, 1922, and the lecture is entitled The Formation of the Etheric and Astral Heart. And in there, he gives a detailed description of the processes that occur within the embryo through its development, and the development of the donated vehicles that are received through the agency of the mother of the etheric and the astral vehicles, and how we gradually are able to transform ourselves through the workings of this other self, so that we can eventually, when you get to be around 3 or 4 years of age, you begin to awaken, and that's usually about as far back as the memory of individuals go back to, and then go back to a particular event to where all of a sudden they had a recognition that they were there. And he says, if you penetrate beyond that point, further back, that's where you come into that cosmic domain of what you might call the ancient child. And so that there's this part of you that has this cosmic relationship to be unlocked. And through one going through the disciplines of spiritual science or meditation, whatever path you may choose, it's important to realize that what it is coming into conscious relationships to those states of being that you went through in the first 3 years of infancy, and that's what initiation is. And like Jesus says that you shall be as children to enter the kingdom of heaven. So that's like, I mean, that's the most sacred trust that you can approach, and that you have this relationship to these higher beings in being able to break through and gain access to those cosmic beings and forces that were present for you and brought about uprightness, speaking and thinking as manifestations of the three primary pre-earthly deeds of Christ. And so it's remarkable I mean, it's like it gives me great joy in talking about it, but it kind of makes me stumble because it's such an awesome thing to contemplate. And when you come into relationship with that, then all you can do is strive to be creative. Like here's an example here that most people I'm sure aren't familiar with, by Richard Grossinger, book Embryogenesis. It's a gigantic study of embryology, and it culminates in the back of the book in attempting to come to terms with Rudolf Steiner's ideas regarding ontogeny, the recapitulation of phylogeny from ontogeny, and that whole idea of metamorphosis, and it's an ambitious endeavor to say the least, and he it was actually presented to professors, and it went through a great deal of critical review, but he says that look upon it as a work of art, and I see that as that because it is a humbling thing. There was a wonderful series of articles that were done by Carl Koenig, I have here somewhere, on the comparison of embryology to cosmogenesis as presented by Rudolf Steiner. So there's places you can go if you're willing to do the work. But that being said, I want to share with you a few things that you can access right away. And if you go beneath the video here, you'll see that you have links to get to Douglas and Tyler Gabriel's books. And there's a link down there. And you also have my books are available. And you can check these things out. But it's important to understand in approaching my books, it's kind of like my books are approached from the perspective, you could say, of the Gospel of Mark, that I attempt to come to terms with the cosmology, with the zodiac, with the planets, and how it's expressed in Rudolf Steiner's work. And so in my books, the Arcana of the Grail Angel, Arcana of Light on the Path, I lay it all out, and I have all the diagrams and all of that. And Douglas wrote the foreword to the first book. Those are available on eBay. If you're outside the US, you can contact me directly through the academia link below, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook. As far as Douglas's books, I think it would be most accurate if I let him describe how you can avail yourself of their contents, because there's so many of them. I don't know which ones he wants to highlight today.
Well, we have a one URL that you can click, and I think you get a PDF, a free copy PDF form of 5 or 6 of them. I can't remember, maybe 7. I can't remember. And then if you go to Neoanthroposophy or ourspirit.com and you click on Neoanthroposophy, you will find numerous other ebooks. I can't remember how many of those there are, 4, 5, 6 of them. I can't remember. And you can also go to intuitivelearning.com, and you can find 2 other free books there, The Spirit of Childhood and Intuitive Learning. So our stuff we try to get out there for free, but you can also find on Amazon.com if you want to have a hard copy in your hands. But what we're trying to do is just, do a lot of presentations where we are synthesizing the wisdom of anthroposophy and presenting it to people, because anthroposophy is somewhat of a difficult spiritual science to grok, to understand, as it were. So you can get those there. And also Aim for Truth is, or American Intelligence Media, or Aim for Truth, or also our sites, and many other sites. But if you go to Aim for Truth, you can then connect to Truth Bits and Patriots for Truth and all the other ones. I've never done that before, John. That was there's a lot to say there, I guess.
Oh, okay. You kind of caught me. I was trying to dig in there for some of our resources here. Yeah, Douglas and Tyla, his industrious wife, she's one of the people that makes this podcast possible. Just a tremendously generous support from Tyla. And also I'd like to mention Vadim and Christian and Mark or Maud and Vivian and De Rouvman and Laura and Paula and Rick and so many others over the years, but especially Tyla Gabriel, so industrious with the American intelligence media and all of the pilot websites from that. Patriots, #4 Truth, patriotsfortruth.org. And then there's also Micah McKibben over at Americans, #4, Americans for Innovation, right? So that's a #4 there. And so that there's no shortage of content that you can avail yourself of. But like I said, if you wish to get with me, or if you want to get through to Douglas, well, you can contact me directly, and I'll see if we could put something together. But in that being said, this is quite an adventure, and I could see we just scratched the surface because I had all these notes and I didn't even get to hardly anything. Which I think that's the beauty of anthroposophy. There's no shortage of things that you can access. And so I thoroughly enjoy that. But I again want to thank everybody that's, through their generous support, is making this endeavor, however humble it may be, possible. And so I want to thank you so much, Douglas, for sharing a part of your afternoon with us, and people peeking in and those that'll come in later. I hope that you find the Grail serving in your life.